bad customer, not bad because they're bad people, but because they don't fit you, is often more destructive than the revenue they bring in, especially for venture scale business.
Welcome back to another episode of Tank Talks. I'm your host, Matt Cohen. On this week's episode, we welcome Niklas Halusa, CEO and co-founder of Nautical Commerce, to discuss how Niklas went from being a venture capitalist to building a platform that is shaking up the e-commerce world. We also discuss how Niklas's VC background has shaped the way he has built Nautical Commerce and some of the common pitfalls he has stumbled into as a first-time founder. We dig into some of his tips on when to go global as a marketplace and how to monetize beyond commissions, alongside the biggest misconceptions about starting a marketplace. And finally, we dig into what it feels like to drive a racing car at 250 miles an hour and how Niklas's racing career prepared him for the race of his life as a startup founder. Now let's jump in the tank for this week's episode with Niklas Halusa from Nautical Commerce. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Niklas.
It's fantastic to be here. Thanks, Matt.
You know, our audience is super excited to learn about your background, but maybe for some of us who don't know about your brief background, can you tell us where you grew up and some of your early career highlights?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm your bit of your classic third culture kid. I think we're common in the founder space, which is I sometimes say I'm Euro trash, but I'm from all over Europe. I spent most of my childhood, I guess, in the UK. Despite being German, and then most of my adult life in the US now. So you could argue that I spent a long enough time in the US to become an American. And I've now settled on a life in tech, but I had some short journeys through first investment banking and then venture capital. So I've been on the finance side, and I've gotten closer and closer to going and becoming a founder with some time in the tech mecca in the Bay Area as a product person, and then the culmination of everything that I'd learned and seen and discovered had me creating Nautical Commerce in 2020.
Yeah, what brought you to the US in the first place?
I studied here, so I had the opportunity, fortunately, to go to a famous American university. And once I got here, maybe I got bitten by the American dream, and I've been stuck here since.
Yeah, well, that happens to a lot of people coming overseas into America. They never find a way to leave. But obviously, you started in the investing side, as you mentioned, before joining on the tech side. How did that start out, and what were you focused on the investing side?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I tell everybody is I thought I was joining a private equity company, which turned out to be a venture capital company. I had no idea about what I was doing. And the fund itself, Activant Capital, that's big fund now, doing very well. It was very early on in their life cycle, but from the beginning had a very clear focus in commerce and commerce technology. So everything that fits into both online and offline commerce stacks. So from the beginning, I was immediately dropped into the online commerce problem, which of course is endless, from the size and the speed that which it moves and the variation in it. So I found no good reason to leave the space, and there's always more opportunity ahead.
I mean, you worked at a pretty influential investing group, Activant. Like, that must have been a whirlwind of expectations, high expectations, but an onslaught of just learning and diving deep into some really exciting markets. What were some of the problems that you were tasked with trying to uncover during your time there?
So I was there actually twice. I left, was on secondment in a portfolio company, then came back. In my second stint, I really focused on this problem. So B2B commerce, which at the time was the hot topic, the hot theme, and truly trying to understand, is there something that we can do in marketplaces, right? There are constantly big marketplaces appearing and then growing like crazy. And as you probably know, as an investor, it's incredibly frustrating to, especially when you're in commerce, to miss something like that, right? Or, and they're difficult. Even today still, and we're trying to make that problem better, they're difficult companies to invest in because the capital demands are that of a tech company, but the unit economics are not often, especially at the beginning. And so I was tasked with very much this problem, which is, hey, can you figure out, is there a space where, we can get into a player that's not necessarily the tech player, but actually the retail player? And my conclusion from all of that was, there needs to be a tech player.
Got it. And I got to ask, is there something in the water in Germany that makes people attracted to the B2B commerce side, like you and Toby from Shopify, and why you want to solve these big problems?
It's not just us. You've got commerce tools And then Stefan from Demandware, Karsten from Hybris. I have to ask if the Magento founders have some German background because they have to. There's something about Germans that makes them go into e-commerce.
There's something
platforms.
in the water.
Maybe it's the bureaucratic compliance aspect of having to get it right. Who knows? But sooner or later, I hope we can make a German commerce mafia and rival the PayPal mafia in e-commerce.
But they say that entrepreneurs are frustrated consumers. You were an investor, an analyzer of the industry. But what were you most frustrated about in terms of the commerce market, and why did it lead you to wanting to start Nautical Commerce?
The way to think about my frustrated consumer is, I don't know how Ripple work, but I imagine in a similar way, which is when your junior folks, of which I was one, was sent out into the wild to go find exciting opportunities. And I talked to a huge amount of marketplaces, and I could never get sufficient conviction to invest. And that has nothing to do with the businesses themselves. I was super excited about the businesses themselves. The founders were often knew their market, knew their buyer, knew their supply side, and perfectly capable of making fantastic businesses. But I could just never justify somebody building all the infrastructure alongside with it. The margins don't justify it. And it's rare that you find people like the Fair founders or the Amazon founders or founder that have the ability to both build an incredibly sophisticated software stack while also building an incredibly sophisticated, fast-growing retail business. And, effectively, I was the consumer of their business model and looked at it and said, this makes, I don't see more marketplaces becoming successful at a fast or at an accelerating rate, as long as you need to be both a developer, a fundraiser, and a market expert. And my co-founder was seeing the same problem, but on the big company side, enterprise side. And so that was sort of the big cue for it. And I'm a big believer in small businesses and helping them grow. And I want to see more variety in the market. And so this was kind of the perfect place to go and build a platform and hopefully see more of these businesses become successful.
And I love that idea of how you took their founders, passion for the marketplace they were building in commerce, but you also questioned whether or not the infrastructure powering it under the hood was sustainable or even scalable. And you looked at that as actually a bigger problem that prevented you from investing in these companies. And you said, you know what? Nobody else is doing it. I'm going to go build it myself. And that's what you built Nautical Commerce as. But maybe for our listeners who don't really know much about it, can you explain what Nautical Commerce is exactly?
Yeah. Try and keep it as simple as possible. We are a full end-to-end platform for running marketplaces with. There are lots of platforms for doing first-person commerce. We operate heavily in a city in Canada where the gorilla in the room is Shopify, who's an incredible business, and they've done an incredible job in first-person commerce. And there's no, serious scalable platform in the third-person commerce, the marketplace space, and that's where we play. And to go and start a marketplace with us, you need, at the very minimum, a way to file your taxes, payment processor, and a way to pay people. That's it. From there on out, you have a marketplace platform.
What is a marketplace? Give us an example of one that I, as a consumer, would interact with.
Yeah, the obvious one is Amazon, right? The elephant in the room, and common ones that consumers interact with: Etsy, eBay, the exciting new fashion trading ones, Poshmark and Vinted and Grailed, and then there's sort of the ones for, you might know if you're a little bit more niche, right? The StockX's of the world or the whatnot that are exciting right now. But you see them all around you, right? Anywhere where you've got an extremely fragmented set of buyers and a very fragmented set of suppliers or sellers, somebody will try to find a way to go and match the supply and the demand, whether it's a broker or a marketplace or something similar, message board. I mean, Facebook Marketplace is a great example as well. There's an opportunity to go and build a marketplace there.
Now, you talked about retail, offerings and marketplaces, but there's also service-based marketplaces, right? There's ones for construction or one's for service work, design work, things like that. Upwork, for example. What did you learn about how marketplaces are being built today that was not capable maybe 5-10 years ago? Or what some of the misconceptions people have around launching a marketplace today that you only learned after building the infrastructure to support them?
There's the two major misconceptions that obviously I'm trying to tackle is the fact that, one, it doesn't need to be a tech company. It doesn't have any IP in it, right? And two, it doesn't need to be venture backed, right? These things are not, that shouldn't be how they work. But if you actually go beyond that, I think one of the other, it's not among the founders, but one of the other things that I see a lot, or I experience a lot with respect to misconceptions in this space, is this assumption that it's static, right? There's Amazon and that's it, right? Where there are, every, I don't want to say generation, but every few years, you see a whole new host of marketplaces spring up, of which many are very successful. And you see often also the legacy marketplaces start to have, bits and bobs nibbled off it, broken off, and turned into their own niches. So it used to be Craigslist ran the internet, and then it was eBay, and then it was Amazon, and yet we're surrounded by many of the markets that I mentioned just now. So first of all, there's a huge variety, and secondly, most of them have similar workflows, not identical. That's what app stores are for, but there's actually a lot of consistency, which allows the ability to go and make a platform, which I think a lot of people who start marketplaces aren't always so aware of because they're so used to thinking of it as a tech play.
Well, you obviously started off in building this marketplaces, but then you added on a bunch of different features. How did you manage sort of the product roadmap in those early days without building too much that would only be utilized by a few customers in order to really be sustainable as an infrastructure play for the commerce industry?
Great question. We didn't, is the honest answer. We have since learned that you can't have your eyes be bigger than your stomach. And what that really means is you'll know this topic a lot better than I will, as somebody who sees startups all day long, is you have to focus. You have to narrow down your niche. You have to narrow down your initial target market. And that feels incredibly theoretical, even for people who make their first seed deck or their first pre-seed deck, because they feel like they have to. But actually, it's one of the most important things that you can spend your time on, is narrowing down, okay, who are you trying to serve right now? And don't worry about growing into a bigger market. And, actually a smaller customer base can really be better for you. And then tailor towards that and say no, right? And bean count your way to success, right? Have a good understanding of how much it's going to cost you and your budget. We made every mistake on the way. We've built all kinds of junk that nobody ever needed, that took a huge amount of time. We had to deprecate all kinds of junk. We built things in a way that didn't make any sense. It's a little bit of the journey, but for sure it could have been shortened if we just spent a little bit more time at the beginning, really, really narrowing down who we're targeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing that we tell our companies at the very early stages of pre-seed is like, say no more than you actually say yes before you actually know what you're building to say yes for.
Yeah, for sure. A bad customer, not bad because they're bad people, but because they don't fit you, is, especially for venture scale business, more destructive often more destructive than the revenue they bring in, because it's distraction on your time and, what you're building, and it doesn't get you closer to being able to find that inflection point. And so it's really, you have to have a good trade-off of revenue now versus revenue, in the future, if you are a venture scale business, right?
Yeah, bootstrap businesses need to survive every day, and that's why they need to take revenue wherever they can. But the luxury of being a venture-backed business, which comes with a double-edged sword in a way, is that you can say no to early revenue from the wrong ICP customer, but you can get the right ICP customer that may not be willing to pay you right away, but give you immense amount of feedback and product direction. Do you remember some of your earliest customers that looking back on, you probably should have said no to, even though they were willing to pay you for whatever you had ready for them?
For sure. Made that mistake too. There's one that I'm not going to say out loud, but if they're listening, they know who they are. That was a fantastic customer. Yeah, great relationship with them. They've done really, really well. Have grown like crazy. But sometime last year, I sat them down and said, "Hey guys, we're going in this direction. You're going in that direction. There is no way that what we keep building makes you guys more successful. And you're going to have to find a way to get off us. We're not going to kick you off because you have an existing business and we like you and we hope you're successful. But I'm just warning you that it's not going to work." Right? And luckily they've done that, and they're about to have an extremely soft landing into some of their own custom built tech in their very specific scenario. And there's a talent also to, being able to do all that gracefully, in that mission of focus and getting the right customer base. You have to have the stomach to be able to say, you know what, this wasn't the right person, this wasn't the right fit. This is not going to be the ending story.
Firing a customer is not something they typically teach you in business school, but it is probably one of the most liberating things you can do as a startup founder, knowing it's going to be for the better. But going into that conversation, maybe the night before when you went to bed, where your stomach must have just been turning.
Yeah, I mean, especially for us, right? Because we run a full platform, right? People rely on us. There's a huge amount of responsibility to being somebody's system. Getting off a commerce platform is not easy.
No, it's like getting off an accounting system or something.
Yeah, exactly. And, people have their plans, right? I mean, we serve startups, which means they don't have 6 months of their life to
offboard,
do their own thing, right? It's a huge spanner in their plans and their roadmap and their financing plans and things like this. So it's not an enjoyable conversation, but...
So your advice for founders, though, would be to do a bunch of self-reflection on your customers if you feel they're the wrong fit for you? Or just don't build stuff until you really understand if it's really going to fit your ICP?
The perfect world is don't dig yourself into the hole in the first place. Don't get that customer. Don't build it if it's not going to be your ICP, or validate everything you're going to do. On the flip side, startups are dirty business, and you will make those mistakes. If you then realize somebody is not a fit, pull that ripcord as fast as you can. Right, that's really the end conclusion.
Yeah, great advice. Obviously you had probably got to product market fit after some twists and turns, because you raised a $30 million Series A led by Drive and our friends at Golden. What was the sort of market like going into that fundraising? What were some of the things you learned from the pitches, and how did all of these early customers that ended up becoming the wrong customers for you help you guide your way into a successful raise because you were able to find the right customers to build off of?
Yeah, so by market, actually clarifying question maybe. You thinking about the e-commerce market or just the fundraising market full stop?
Both. I would start with the fundraising market, but also how your e-commerce market had drastically changed during COVID.
Yeah, so we got a bit lucky, honestly. I didn't see COVID coming. I'm not going to pretend to. But the first 2 years of COVID, so we raised in 2022, right? So first 2 years of COVID were the peak time to have a commerce startup, right? I'd love to chalk it all up to my incredible charisma and charm, but there's some aspect of the fact that we were in an extremely exciting dynamic market for online commerce. It was exploding, right? Nothing was happening offline. We were lucky, to be honest, that there was a range of investors that had done the same work as us, right? Seeing a bunch of marketplaces get built and none of them being built on anything that looks like a consistent, reliable, trustworthy core infrastructure. And the advice I often have for founders when it comes to just specifically the fundraising problem, right? Apart from, how to build a good business and things like this, is two things. First of all, you really, really have to know your problem, right? And that's also what I tell our customers, right? When they think about fundraising, right? Really, really know your problem, your buyer and your seller. And then the second is, go find an investor who sees the world like you do, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the predictions, it's about you both having, let's call it, conviction in the path and the decisions that you have to make, right? And we were, I think, fortunate to find a bunch of very smart, very thoughtful investors that were independently already peeling away at this.
Yeah. No, it definitely helps when you got investors who've done the preliminary work to really think about how they can catch up to where you are and find that perfect alignment. Did you go through a lot of fundraising conversations, or were you able to narrow down a great investor to lead the round pretty quickly?
So I'm not going to go on too much of a diatribe here, but I have a philosophy around there's the sowing and the reaping phase in investing. Less true of the first round, but for sure of subsequent rounds, is you're always having investor conversations, right? Because you're always trying to look, you should always be looking as a founder for somebody who sees the world like they are. It's like extreme enterprise sales, right? And 24 to 36 months, you need to close the deal, right? But you start talking now, right? And then there's the phase of which you actually need to go raise some money, in which you go and, turn the heat up a little bit, right? Pull the starter or shoot the starter gun, right? And then, you shouldn't be in a place where you have to chase a huge amount of investors because it's too late. You haven't built a relationship yet. So I did talk to, and I still do talk to a lot of investors, even though I have nothing to sell, because we're not fundraising, just for the relationship building of the fact that if they know me and I know them, and we've spoken about these topics, we've built a form of trust, which is more valuable than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Always be fundraising is the saying, obviously, even though it's a love-hate relationship for a lot of founders out there. But, I got to ask, do you think some of the investors on your cap table are looking at Nautical as a way to understand how great marketplaces are built and scaled quickly so that they can inherently bet on those marketplaces as well as individual investments?
It's a good question. I think the first and foremost concern is whether we will return money on their investment.
Of course.
With everything else, let's call it a second priority. But look, it's very clear that if you just look at the corollary of something like a Shopify was huge in our space, that they've done a really, really good job in deploying capital, in buying, for example, service providers in their own ecosystem, and being able to extend that way because they have a huge amount of data.
Klaviyo, Flexport, yeah, of course. They've turned billions into multiple billions just by being a VC themselves almost. But I guess maybe from your perspective, seeing a lot of your customers succeed or ones maybe take a couple missteps, what have you seen that's made marketplaces scale so efficiently after they've launched on Nautical that other marketplaces should learn from? Because I'm sure there's a lot of thought leadership that you guys put out on your own podcast and content to help marketplaces scale fast, like a StockX.
Yeah. So, 0 to 1, really about being able to mechanical Turk as much as you can, right? And not over optimizing, right? Go and build an understanding of your buyers and your sellers. And I think that one is very clear from everything that I've seen, is that the biggest mistake there was over optimization, right? Just start taking orders because a perfect plan for an imperfect problem gets you nowhere. Beyond that, I think there's probably two. I mean, the first is a obsessive, because at the end of the day, you have these two sets of stakeholders that you really need to go and incentivize to get working, right? And there's a reason why Amazon is so, for example, customers obsessed, right? Is because, or client obsessed, is because I think that's one very big solution. Be obsessive about what your buyers are doing and what your sellers are actually doing to keep them in the ecosystem. and be really thoughtful about the data that you can get your hands on, or for what is actually happening in your ecosystem. Because
Can you double click on that, like specifically?
Yeah. So, a common example, right, is search data. What are people actually looking for inside your store? Now, there's a different problem slightly. If you're in the first person commerce space, you take that information and you do something with it. Or in Amazon's case, right, you take that information and you sell your own stuff, right? In a marketplace world, you may take that information and say to your sellers, or find a way to talk to your sellers, hey, have you considered selling XYZ category, right? Or, all these data services to go and, at the end of the day, what you're trying to create is a bigger basket value, or more return orders, or more successful orders, right? Given somebody landing on your page, right? Fewer bounces, right? And so for you to be able to get all that data, package it up, syndicate it out to your supply side, helps everybody win. You win because it grows, your buyers win because they find what they want, and your sellers win because they make more money, right? And they have a clear path to making money.
Right. That makes sense.
And that's what happens because you kind of do nothing as a marketplace, right? Your job is, you're just an oversight person, right? You're there to make sure that everyone else does things, right? And as things grow, the best way to do that is to have a really insightful approach to data.
That makes sense. Can I ask you a question? I've heard before that when starting a new marketplace, it's always important to focus on the top 20% of suppliers in a given market, because they represent 80% of the transaction volume, rather than trying to get any and all suppliers on the platform. Do you agree with that? If so, why or why not?
I don't out of the gate have a particularly strong opinion.
I just heard bad suppliers or lower tier suppliers can dilute the quality of the marketplace, and you'll never get buyers on, because it's always the shittiest suppliers who need to find demand who end up saying yes to joining a marketplace first.
Yes, with a big caveat of, there are certain spaces where you can't rely on that, right? Like anything peer to peer, good luck, right? You have to take who you're given. A little bit of a variety of marketplaces, but I think that's generally true, right? Which is that you've got people who you also see them in finances, right? You have really value adds suppliers who also, from a support perspective and from a growth perspective, usually outweigh the folks who are, never quite happy with what they're getting, or the price, or something like this. And they're just not a fit for your marketplace, right? They might have to sell somewhere else, or they may not even be suited to selling on a marketplace in the first place. So I think that's probably true, with a big asterisk to it.
Okay. Well, what are some effective ways that you are seeing marketplaces monetize beyond just charging a commission that you've been able to offer as features on Nautical?
Yeah. So monetization is a rabbit hole that we can make a whole podcast on marketplace math. But there are a few common use cases, right? One that you see everywhere is to have sellers pay some sort of a subscription, right? Now, there's a limit to whether some marketplaces have, let's call it the carrot or the stick, to be able to do that. But it's very common to have some sort of an access fee, particularly ones where the sellers may be more desperate for the buyers than the buyers for the sellers, right? So you may want to attract buyers by making it very cheap, right? But the sellers bear the cost. Or ones, for example, where there's some disintermediation risk. So the seller is excited to get business from the buyer, right? So you can't expect a return order, just can't make the math work. And then there's a lot of value-add services, right? So this is kind of a theme within commerce in general, right? Which is, hey, there's a cost of transacting, a commission or a fee or something like this, right? But can you, as a marketplace, be able to provide services? So I think the stat is that Amazon makes, again, as an example, 46% of all the dollars running through their ecosystem, right? Through helping with logistics, helping with advertising. There are lots of companies out there that help with lending and merchandising and, all kinds of value-add services on top of that. And, for some of these things, we have tools, we have integrations. For some of these things, they're on the roadmap. But I think the theme is very clear, right? Which is, for long-term success of the marketplace, you've got to have good unit economics as far as you can on your base, economic model of your commission and whatever fees you have around that. But as you get flow, you get a huge amount of levers to go and increase your take, or at the end of the day, your gross margin.
Yeah, I mean, for you as well, attrition is probably something that your customers are so concerned about. Putting all these different add-ons and features that they can use as creating stickiness between their buyers and sellers is super important to building long-term trust, I'm sure, in your own business. What do you think as an ex-VC most investors get wrong when looking at evaluating marketplaces for opportunities?
Yeah, it's a good question. Going back to the same old, pinata I was using earlier. Don't worry about the IP. It's the customers. The biggest example, if you take another example, I've been kind of harping on some specific names, but you take something like a Farfetch, which is spending, by their own admission, $200 million a year on technology, right? Got bought by Coupang for 500 after doing north of $2 billion in revenue, right? Those are not software valuations, right? Nor is there an IP in that. It's your buyers and your sellers at the end of the day. And I think the early, I would say, depending on the stage, I think there's a lot of data-driven investing in marketplaces that I think is thoughtful and comes from a good place. But I would argue, especially in the early stage investing world, that that there are many founders who may not at the beginning have an incredible intuition around that sort of very heavily theoretical data set, but have an incredibly good intuition about their buyer and their seller. That is sometimes, to use a phrase that I learned from a wise old investing man, the victory of analysis over common sense.
Right. I guess match your capital sources with your maybe expected outcome of buyers is one thing I'm hearing, because not all marketplaces are like VC SaaS companies, and they should not be valued that way. And also understanding what your angle is to scaling both the supply and demand side efficiently is one thing. Look at companies like Wish, back in the day, like how big they got, but how quickly they crumbled as a marketplace that was heavily diluted. Do you find that marketplaces today can be built much more efficiently, as well as more thoughtfully than ever before because of platforms like Nautical and others?
For sure. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't be here today. I think that's exactly why we exist.
So what do you focus on for Nautical's health and growth as a platform and the infrastructure supporting marketplaces? How do you judge your own success by looking at your customer success?
Yeah, so it's all second derivative, right? If they are growing, if their buyer base is growing, if their sellers are growing, and they're able to do that at least efficiently from a costs perspective, that's like headcount, things like this. I think that's a really good sign, because we should be giving them the opportunity to either reduce the amount of heavy technical headcount that they to deal with, or reduce the amount of operational headcount that they have to service per order, right? So the basic math is how much you take per order and how many people do you need to service that, and some other costs, right? Which will, some of which we don't control, but for many marketplaces, that's a giant chunk of R&D. So I think that's, for me, the most important, right? Are they growing? Are they efficiently getting buyers and sellers? And are they able to go and handle that volume in a way that creates a positive business model? And for us, it's really, if we think about our metric, I think time to value is really important, right? So, can somebody get our system and, to your question, get up and running and transacting and making money faster and easier than ever before? Because the secret to entrepreneurship is testing your market, is riskiest assumption testing. So the faster you can do that, the more likely you're to know whether you've got a business.
That's interesting. Are you a student of the public market, like commerce platforms, earnings, like the MD&A of Shopify or Amazon or Temu, PDD, or Alibaba? Do you study those earnings calls?
Not really, actually.
Why?
I also believe in the philosophy of don't over-focus on your competition, or it's not on you, even if it's indirect, right? Many of them aren't even competition. I think time is best spent in understanding your customer. I think what you can learn, they also at a different stage often, right? I think a public company, they have different problems and different concerns to a startup, quite frankly. There are different issues. So I stay relatively high level, right? I mean, what are they focusing on? What are they focusing their budget on?
I was going to say, like, where their CapEx is going.
Right. What are they, if a giant moves, the ground shakes. So it's good to know what they're doing, right? How is the most important part to me is how the consumer is changing, right? That's where kind of the TikToks of the world and the Instagrams of the world and their shops and things like this interest me a lot. But I haven't historically seen a huge amount of value in trying to read the tea leaves of a PR protected, 10,000 person company.
What's the one skill, Niklas, that you have developed, recently that you never thought you would had to develop when you started Nautical?
Narrative.
How so? Publicly, internally?
Internally, not externally. Externally, everybody knows you got to fundraise and have sound bites for the media. Internally, right? So the ability to frame the problems, goals, all these kinds of things of the company in a way that brings everybody in. And I've noticed that the better you can do that, the better people can focus their time because they know why they're doing things. And it's an incredible greaser of conflict, right? It really oils the gears of conflict. If you can structure narrative in a way that targets everybody at this conceptually the same goal, the same worldview. They're not arguing about worldviews; they're arguing about implementation. It took me a long time to learn that.
Do you do tactical things like AMAs or town halls with all your employees often?
Yeah, we have bi-weekly all hands and things like this. I used to write a newsletter, but I'm not disciplined enough to keep it up. But, there's also we're a hybrid company, right? So we're partly in office, and there's a huge amount of value to walking the floor and taking people out to coffee and just talking to them, and tailoring it to the way that each individual person thinks.
Yeah, I got to ask because I've heard that you are a serious car racer, or was a serious car racer, a huge F1 fan. What are some of the skills you learned during your career as a car racer that have transferred over to your role as a startup founder?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Risk taking, I've got to assume, is one.
Risk appetite actually maybe is not I actually also believe in that saying that actually founders are quite risk averse. I live in fear of saying the verbal equivalent of a LinkedIn post of, things I've learned from my marriage, from B2B SaaS or whatever it is. But, I think actually I've learned a lot about both from war following F1 or my own stuff on how to approach engineering conversations, right? In, knowing how to invest time in making sure that you focus on a limited set of problems and focus your resources that way, and know that you can't boil the ocean every way. You can't do everything that you want, right? Because engineering at the end of the day is very, both cars and computers, right? You're always going to be resource constrained. You can't solve every problem. You can't it's a very complicated system. You can't nail the perfect solution. So you really have to have a good understanding for what you're trying to solve. So if you watch something like, let's put it into real terms, if you watch something like F1 and you listen to these team principals or the technical directors, and they say, look, we have one mission, right? And that's to evolve the car to be, kinder on its tires, right? Or something like this. That's going to be F1 specific term, but this goal of setting a single mission and then guiding everybody towards it, and not trying to do too many things at once.
Okay, so focusing on one mission at a time, I guess, is like saying someone in F1 who's never going to challenge, Max Verstappen for first place is like, we just want to be in the top 10. And the only way to get there is focusing on this one issue with the car this year. And then we'll progress to the next issue the next year because it's such a monumental jump from, 15th to maybe 8th or 9th. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you read Adrian Newey's book, How to Build a Car, he's sort of the god of F1 car designing. He talks a lot about evolutionary, not revolutionary approaches.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote by Ayn Rand that says, the money doesn't replace you as a driver, but it does make you go faster. Do you think money makes you go faster, but it won't change you as a founder?
Yeah, if you know how to use it. I think money, you said earlier, a double-edged sword. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Money can make you go a lot slower too, right? Because it breeds complacency.
True.
And it makes you not focus, right? If you think you could do everything in parallel, you will try to make, to use another Formula One quote, or at least when I learned from Formula One, you will make 9 women pregnant and you're going to expect a baby in a month. And that's not how things work. I think it's important to be very thoughtful about what your capital actually does for you in a startup.
What's your max speed that you've ever gone in a race car?
200 miles an hour. Let's see. I can't do the conversion in my head.
Miles is fine. I'll take that. No problem. Okay. So that's very freaking fast. Was it, were you calm? Were you nervous? Was it like crazy?
You don't notice.
You don't notice it.
Yeah. If you're in a car that does that sort of a speed, the thing is designed to make you feel comfortable at that speed, right? Doing 213 in a Skoda, which I don't think is possible, would be terrifying, right? But we get into an airplane. All of us get into airplanes all the time and do 500, 600 miles an hour. And we drink a coffee and fall asleep, right? It's a tool designed to go at that speed.
Very cool analogy. I like that.
And so, for the one that I did it in, it's so incredibly designed for it that you feel like you're going 80 on the highway.
Okay. First, last question before we jump into our fast favorites. If someone was on the fence about quitting their job to build a marketplace today, what would you tell them besides build on Nautical?
Don't at first, right? If you're not there from a conviction perspective, the world's gotten advanced enough that you can start something without having to quit your job immediately. Get something out there, try it, right? Because if you really start a company, you should expect to spend the next 7 to 10 years of your life on it, right? If you're not comfortable with making that jump because you don't have enough conviction, find a way to find conviction. The best way to find conviction, if you have run out of research, is to start. And I think you'll quickly learn whether this is something that you both have a passion for and whether there's something, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, I love that advice. I couldn't agree more. There's never been a better time to start a side hustle without having to go all in right away until you have the conviction. So great advice. Before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
In industry, it's probably How I Built This, Guy Raz. Outside of industry, F1 Beyond the Grid.
Of course. Those are 2 great ones. Awesome. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog?
Stratechery.
Nice. Next is your favorite tech gadget?
8 Sleep.
Oh, you have one.
It's vanilla, but it is incredible. Especially if you are in a relationship and you share the bed with somebody, having different temperatures on each side is a godsend.
I've been trying to convince my wife to do it, and I just can't seem to get her to add another tech gadget to our house, but maybe for her birthday, I'll get it and see how she reacts. Next is
It's worth it.
It's worth it.
Removes the need for marriage counseling, I expect.
Perfect. I'll explain it that way to her. Next is your favorite new trend.
I don't know if the trend's still going, but there was a very hot period. There was a hot moment of antitrust in the last couple of years that I was pretty excited by. As a guy who loves the creation and the power of small businesses. A lot of middle-class wealth is built on small businesses, and monopolies are typically enemies of middle class.
Do you think that's going away? I think it's only getting more pervasive.
Let's see. New in Europe, it continues.
Oh, sure.
In the US,
right.
New regime, new rules. I don't pretend to be a political pundit, so I don't know where it's going to go.
No, it's a great answer. I've never heard that one before in the show. All right, next is your favorite book.
I sell everybody on Children of Time. Very, very odd sci-fi written by zoologist, biologist.
And what's it about?
It is about without trying to, let's see what I can do without spoilers here. It is about alternate, let's call it an alternate universe, where there's a planet where the top life form, the apex life form, is not hyper intelligent people, but hyper intelligent or hyper evolved insect. But written in a very interesting, nearly, let's call it journalistic, or I don't know what the right term is, style of exploring how these societies and this higher intelligence might manifest.
Sounds like Planet of the Apes, but for insects, or that movie that, what was that movie Denise Richards was in, where they fight those aliens on other planets? Starship Troopers.
Classic film. Exactly. Starship, not that far away from a serious Starship Trooper.
Okay, I love that movie. That was 1997. Wow, an oldie but a goodie. Okay, fantastic. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
The definition of success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm.
Oh, fantastic. Great quote and great way to end it off. Thanks for joining us in the tank today with Niklas Halusa, CEO and co-founder of Nautical Commerce.
Really enjoyed this. Thanks so much, Matt. And keep it up. Love this podcast.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tank Talks. We hope you found today's conversation as insightful as we did. If you're enjoying the show, we've got 3 quick things to ask of you. First, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or YouTube. Next, follow us and stay up to date on upcoming episodes and behind-the-scenes content on social media with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And lastly, share the love. If you found value in today's episode, share with a friend or colleague who'd benefit too. Your support helps us bring in more amazing guests and keeps the Tank Talks engine running. That's it for